I've been hauling freight across this country for nearly 2 decades now, and I've seen my share of strange things on lonely highways, especially in the dead of night. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I experienced just a few weeks ago. You might say I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe I just had the rotten luck of stumbling onto something nobody was ever meant to see. Either way, I'm about to tell you a tale that still makes my skin crawl every time I think about it. Let's just say, if you ever run out of hours on your logbook in the middle of nowhere, maybe you should call for a tow instead of trying to wait it out. It all started at the tail end of a stressful week. I'd been delayed at my last drop site, some kind of logistical nightmare that kept me waiting an extra 10 hours. Because of that, I was out of driving hours sooner than I had planned, and I knew I wouldn't make it to the nearest truck stop without breaking the law. My logs showed my weekly hours were pretty much shot. I needed a 34-hour restart. So I found what looked like an abandoned parking lot, just off a back road, near a place I couldn't even find on my GPS. There were no lights, no buildings in sight, just an old broken sign that might have once pointed travelers to a diner or motel. Even though it was creepy, I was so exhausted that any flat spot felt like paradise. I set my brake and looked around the desolate stretch. The day was fading quickly, and a bruised orange sky bled into the horizon. My rig rattled a bit in the wind, and I remember thinking I should double-check the weather forecast. But it wasn't just the wind that bothered me. It was the eerie silence, like the landscape was holding its breath. Normally, you hear insects buzzing or maybe some distant engine whir, but there was nothing. I chalked it up to my fatigue, not wanting to let my imagination get away from me. Because I knew I was stuck for 34 hours, I decided I might as well stretch my legs and find something to eat. The prospect of nibbling on stale granola bars for a day and a half didn't appeal to me. So I locked up the truck, hoisted on my jacket, and started walking down the closest dirt road. After maybe half a mile, I saw some flickering lights. Turns out it was a small town. I was relieved, but also a little uneasy because it looked more like a ghost town than a living one. Most windows were boarded up or dark, and I couldn't see a soul on the streets. Eventually, I found 2 small stores, side by side. A ragged convenience store and what looked like a second-hand shop. Above them, a single light bulb flickered like it might burn out at any second. The sign on the door said they closed before sundown, which was practically now. I raced toward the entrance. A bell tinkled overhead as I pushed inside, and I nearly collided with an older man in a dusty apron who was stacking some last-minute supplies. "Whoa there," he said, voice shaky. "You just made it in before closing." He didn't look happy to see me, but he didn't look angry either, more like anxious. I grabbed some water, a couple of energy drinks, jerky, and whatever else seemed edible. I figured I'd need enough to last until I could move my rig again. When I went to pay, the clerk leaned in conspiratorially. "You're just passing through, right?" I explained that I was a truck driver and told him I'd run out of hours, so I was stuck for at least the next day and a half. His eyes darted from me to the window and back again, like he was checking for something outside. "I strongly suggest you keep going," he said, his voice low. "It's not safe here after dark." I almost laughed, thinking maybe the guy was just worried about petty crime or vandalism. "I can't," I told him. "FMCSA regulations. My electronic logs say I can't drive anymore this week. I'm stuck here whether I like it or not." He swallowed hard. "Then come with me. I'll give you shelter for the night." I should have said no. Every instinct told me to be wary. But a wave of fatigue hit me, and to be honest, the idea of a couch or even a warm floor sounded better than sleeping in my truck with no backup around. So I nodded, paid for my things, and followed the old clerk outside. He locked up the store in a hurry, glancing left and right at the darkening streets as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. His place wasn't far, an old ranch-style house with a sagging porch. The moment I walked in, I caught a pungent whiff of garlic. It was overwhelming, like someone had dumped buckets of minced cloves in the corners. That wasn't the only odd thing. Every wall displayed crucifixes, wooden, metal, big, small, some draped with rosaries, others cracked and ancient-looking. I must have had a look of shock on my face, because the old man, his name was Barney, just let out a nervous chuckle. "I know," he said. "It's a lot, but trust me, it's necessary." "Necessary for what?" I asked. "For them," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "For the vampires. Let me tell you, that word cleared the fog of my exhaustion right out of my head. I almost laughed, actually laughed, but I saw in Barney's eyes that he wasn't joking. He was terrified. "You can't be serious," I managed to say. He waved a hand dismissively. "I get it. You think I'm crazy. Believe me, I wish I was. This town, it's a haven for them. Used to be a normal place when I was young, but little by little, people left or disappeared. The ones who stayed had to adapt. Garlic, crucifixes, never venturing outside after sundown. It's the only way to survive." I stood there, staring at him like he was telling me a ghost story. Adrenaline spiked through me, but my rational side told me he was just old, maybe paranoid from living alone for too long. So I thanked him for his hospitality, but said I needed some fresh air. That was a mistake, because as soon as I approached the door, Barney grabbed my arm. "They're here." At first, I thought he was being melodramatic, but then I saw them. Figures moving outside the windows, shadows that seemed to glide rather than walk. My heart thudded as I realized there were at least 4 or 5 shapes. They had no fear of the porch lights, and they moved with an uncanny smoothness, as if gravity didn't hold them in the same way it held you or me. One of them spoke, its voice rattling against the windows. "We smell fresh blood in there, Barney. Give him to us, and we'll leave you alone for another week." I felt my stomach drop. There was no mistaking the inhuman rasp to its voice. My denial shattered in an instant, replaced by cold, choking fear. I looked at Barney, who was trembling but still holding onto my arm. "I told you," he whispered. "You'd best stay. I'm too old to fight them, but I'm not giving you up." Something in me snapped into place. Maybe it was the trucker's stubbornness, or maybe just a survival instinct, but in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to die cowering in a corner. "If we're going to survive, we have to fight back," I said. "How do we kill them?" Barney shrugged, eyes brimming with fear and a desperate glint of hope. "Legends say a stake through the heart, beheading, sunlight, but I could never be quick enough to do it. I've survived by locking myself inside, using garlic and crosses. They're faster than you can imagine." I drew in a shaky breath. "We need a plan. They're out there now, but it's not quite fully dark yet. Let's hold them off until just before dawn, then we'll have the sun on our side. Meanwhile, we draw them in, catch them off guard." Barney looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. "What did you have in mind?" I told him what I was thinking. Vampires, according to every story I'd ever heard, are drawn to fresh blood like moths to a flame. If I could make myself bleed just enough to lure them in, maybe we could strike when they were distracted. He seemed hesitant at first, worried that it was too dangerous, but neither of us saw another way out. Barricading ourselves for 34 hours wasn't an option. Eventually, they'd break in, or we'd starve. And once nighttime was fully upon us, I had no illusions we'd last long. We spent the night holed up in his living room, every light in the house turned on, waiting for our moment. The vampires outside didn't leave. I'd catch glimpses of pale faces staring in through the windows, black eyes full of hunger. One even pressed its face right up against the glass, lips curled back to reveal unnaturally long fangs. When it hissed, I could see its breath fog the window, as though it were alive and dead at the same time. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I had to fight the urge to retch from the anxiety. As the night wore on, they probed the house, scratching at the doors, knocking on windows, even rattling the front doorknob. But every time they tried to break in, it was as if the garlic and crucifixes prevented them from crossing the threshold without invitation. I thanked whoever was listening that the old legends seemed to hold true. Around 5 a.m, a faint grey light began to tint the horizon. Dawn was coming. That was our cue. I nodded to Barney and carefully sliced a small cut on my forearm with a kitchen knife. Pain flared, and blood trickled from the wound. Immediately, I felt a wave of dizziness. But I also saw the vampires react, pressing their pale faces closer to the windows. One let out a shriek that was half growl, half laughter. They could smell me. Together, we unbolted the front door. My heart thundered. I could feel adrenaline electrifying every inch of my body. We needed them to come in, so we stepped back, leaving the door ajar. Within seconds, the first vampire slithered into the doorway, defying every law of physics as it crept along the walls and ceiling. Its eyes were wide, 2 shiny black orbs set in a bone-white face. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, brandishing a thick wooden stake that Barney had fashioned from a broken chair leg. "Come and get me." The vampire lunged, unnervingly fast. I felt its cold fingers brush my arm, trying to latch onto the bleeding cut, but I twisted at the last second. Barney, trembling but determined, swung a hatchet he'd had hidden in his shed. The blade sank into the vampire's neck with a nauseating crunch. Dark, clotted blood splattered the walls. The thing screeched, a sound like metal scraping metal, but it didn't die outright. Its eyes were wild with hatred. I used that moment to shove the stake through its heart. This time, the shriek cut off abruptly, and its body crumpled, disintegrating into a pile of ashen fragments right in front of our eyes. I'd barely recovered from that horror when the next one stormed in, flanked by 2 more. My blood was all over my arm now, thick and shining. The vampire's nostrils flared as they locked onto the smell. Fear sharpened my senses. I ducked and slid across the floor, grabbing a second stake as Barney swung wildly at the one coming at him. The old man got knocked hard across the room. I lunged at the vampire that had attacked him, slamming the stake downward. It hissed, unbelievably strong, nearly throwing me off. But I forced my weight behind the blow, felt the stake pierce flesh and bone. Another spray of that clotted black blood, and another body turned to ash. By now, the sky outside was growing brighter. Slivers of sunlight began to creep across the threshold. One vampire, noticing the light, let out a panicked shriek and tried to retreat. Barney, battered and limping, managed to swing the hatchet again, catching it across the shoulder. I followed through with a stake to the chest. The other remaining vampire, a tall, gaunt figure with elongated limbs, realized it was trapped between the rising sun and us. With a final inhuman growl, it hurled itself at my throat. Its teeth grazed my skin, fangs scraping dangerously close to my jugular. I felt hot pain. Blood trickled from where it cut me. The creature's saliva dripped into the wound. My vision swam, momentarily going black at the edges. Then Barney let out a strangled yell and brought a wooden club crashing against the creature's back. The vampire snarled, whirling around. That gave me just enough time to jam my stake through its ribs. The sun hit it full in the face a moment later. Its flesh began to peel, and it dissolved into nothing but swirling ash, scattering into the morning wind. With that, an awful silence fell over the house. No more vampires lurked at the windows. The sun rose higher, flooding the living room with pale light. My breathing was ragged, and I clutched my neck. I tasted my own blood on my lips, rancid and coppery. Barney staggered over, worry etched into every line of his face. "You're hurt," he said. I waved him off. "I'll be okay. They're dead, right? All of them?" Barney nodded weakly, though I could see a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. We didn't speak much after that. I helped him clean up the worst of the mess, and he bandaged the cuts on my arm and neck as best he could. He kept apologizing, thanking me, apologizing again. I told him no thanks were necessary, that I was just trying to stay alive, same as him. We parted ways as the sun climbed above the horizon, the light fierce and comforting. Before I left, I glanced back at the house one last time. Barney stood on the porch, looking more relieved than I've ever seen a person look. He gave me a tremulous wave. I was eager to get back to my truck, maybe use some of the first aid kit I kept in the sleeper, and figure out how I'd report this, if I even would. Who'd believe such a story? I trudged back to my rig, the morning sun brighter than I remembered. My eyes stung, and I found myself slipping on my darkest pair of sunglasses, but even that barely helped. By the time I reached the abandoned parking lot, the sun felt like a blade slicing into my vision, and a headache pounded behind my eyes. Finally, I climbed into the cab and started the engine, half expecting it not to turn over after the chaos of the night. But my truck roared to life. I checked the time on my log. I still had to wait out the final hours of my reset, yet something in me said, just drive. Get away from this place. So I did. I didn't care about the hours. Some primal instinct overtook me. That town wasn't safe. Maybe it was safer now that we killed those vampires. But deep down, I suspected it was rotten to the core. As I pulled onto the highway, the sun climbed higher, and my headache got worse. I fumbled in the glove box for a second pair of sunglasses to layer over the first. I was sweating, my skin felt tight, and every sliver of morning light pouring through the windshield burned. No sunglasses seemed dark enough. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For a second, I swear I saw my own eyes flicker black, then vanish back to normal. A trick of the light, I told myself. But my gums ached, and I felt an odd pressure in my teeth. I thought about the vampire saliva that dripped into my neck wound, how it mingled with my own blood. A chill settled in my bones, even as sweat soaked my shirt. Gripping the wheel, I forced my gaze back onto the road. This was a quiet stretch of highway, the sunrise painting the horizon with hues of gold and pink. Normally, it would be a beautiful sight, but to me, it was agony. My pulse hammered, a dread unlike anything I'd ever felt creeping through my veins. I wish I could tell you everything's fine now, that the nightmares ended when I left that cursed town. But the truth is, something changed in me that morning. As I drive into each new day, I find my appetite shifting. I shy away from open sunlight, and no matter how many pairs of sunglasses I wear, the world is too bright, too painful. Some nights I dream of the thirst, that ravenous hunger I saw in those vampires' eyes. Every time I wake up, I check my teeth in the mirror, and so far they still look normal, but I can't help feeling it's only a matter of time before those nightmares become reality. Maybe one day soon, I won't need a logbook to tell me I can't drive at sunrise, because I won't be able to stand the day at all. And so I keep moving, crossing state lines, as the invisible infection twists inside me, praying that whatever cursed darkness I carry never fully takes hold. Because if it does, let's just say, I wouldn't want to stumble upon some poor trucker lost in the night, smelling of fresh blood. God help me if I do.